Hey everyone, thank you so much for making it for the Summit Series event. This is a really special event for us because we have Sir Ronnie Cohen here, who is the father of impact investing. So it's really nice to have him here. I'm Shagun. I'm the president of the Social Impact Club and the Student Impact Investment Fund. I'll just give you a brief. I'm sure all of you already know a lot about him, but I'll just give a tiny brief. But so Ronnie Cohen is a pioneering leader in impact investing. So he's actually the president of GSG Impact, the chair of IFVI. He is also the chair of the Portland Trust, and he has co-founded a lot of impact investment funds and blended finance funds that you must have heard of, which is Bridges Impact Funds, Better Society Capital, and Social Finance branches. Fun fact, I am actually working part time at Social Finance, so I do feel like I also have him to thank for all my travel expenditure. But yeah, so Ronnie Cohen has spent 2 decades working on just trying to get private capital to move towards funding social and environmental topics. He was also felicitated by Rockefeller Foundation with the Innovation Award. Beyond just his startups, he has been working at a systemic level. He chaired the Social Impact Investment Task Force under UK's G8 presidency. He was also an advisor to G7's Impact Task Force. And to add to a very long list of things I am saying, he also co founded Apex Partners, which is a global VC firm. So, yeah, just so I don't bore you with the long list, because it is a long list, he has also helped set up the British and EU VC Association and held very prominent positions at Harvard University, Oxford University, the British Museum, and the International Institution for Strategic Studies. So, yeah, as you can see, he is a great person to have here and to hear from. So really excited about that. The way today is going to go is that Sir Ronnie is going to start off with a small talk on the topic of impact investing. From there, Professor Lorenzia is going to take over, and we're going to have a moderated fireside chat followed by Q&A. So please do make note of any questions that arise as you're going through it. And then we're going to end with a networking session on Lower Link Bridge. Don't crowd it out here. Just move to Lower Link Bridge once you're done. We also have a few copies of his book, which we will also have a signing for in the Lower Link Bridge, so do be present. But yeah, I will stop now and welcome Sir Ronnie Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sure you've all been furiously calculating how I could possibly be less than 100 years old. It's a great pleasure to be back at LBS and to be here with all of you to talk about impact. The first time I spoke about impact at LBS, it was just an idea beginning to take form. And now I understand that you have 500 members of the Impact Club. So I look forward to a conversation with all of you and with Lucretia, Professor Reichlin, with whom part of my impact journey has been traveled. So let me start by saying that I think we are at a watershed now. We're at a watershed which is going to affect all of your careers, and in my view, will affect the whole world. And the watershed is a watershed between a risk-return economy and a risk-return impact economy. And the way the watershed is going to be defined is through the availability of monetized data about impacts, which will appear, I hope, in the middle of this year on the screens of the big data providers. So you'll be able to look at the financial accounts of a company, and you'll be able to look alongside at all its impacts, broken down in monetary terms, the environmental impacts initially, starting with emissions, water consumption, water pollution, soil erosion, waste, and then the social impacts, differences between the wage levels of a company and the living wage or the minimum wage or the average for the sector, the level of diversity in a company, putting an economic cost on diversity by looking at the employee distribution according to gender, ethnic background, and other variables, and the difference with the surrounding community, and ascribing a salary level to these employees, and viewing that as the economic deficit, if you like, in terms of diversity. If you push these numbers, you come up with insights which we previously have not had. For example, a company like Amazon would have a diversity deficit of $6 billion. Apple, $2.5 billion. But when you compare those sums with their wage bills, Amazon is actually the better performer with 16% versus Apple at 25%. So I hope you can begin to see that when an investor looks at this screen, the investor will be asking themselves, how is this company's impact, how are this company's impact going to affect its growth and its profits? And so investors will begin to analyze companies by looking at whether their growth of sales and profit is correlated with the growth of their emissions and other impacts, right? So if the growth of sales is like that and the emissions are going like that, then it's decoupled. And if they're both going at the same rate, and we already have 25 countries levying carbon taxes, then it's going to be paying carbon taxes in the future, which will affect its profitability. So investors will begin to bring impacts into financial analysis in a way until now we've not been able to do. Now, why is this going to change the world? Why is it going to start by transforming capital markets? Because we have already seen the world shifting to risk, return, and impact in ESG capital flows, which reached $30 trillion. I'm sure all of you know about ESG, but if I can just highlight a couple of points about it. At the time of the G8 Social Impact Investment Task Force, ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance investing, was $13 trillion. It got from 13 trillion to 30 trillion in less than a decade. Why did ESG become discredited? It became discredited because investors didn't know what impacts were being delivered. They knew what profits were being delivered, but not what impacts. And the pushback from the status quo, from the oil companies and others, in discrediting ESG, focused on this lack of measurement. Look, it's just propaganda, it means nothing, forget it. When you bring impact accounting to 30 trillion, you bring it to 14% of the world's investable capital. Usually, tipping point is defined as 10%. So if we can manage to bring into use impact accounting by investors, it will begin to change the behavior of companies. Companies have not been interested, really, in changing their emissions or their social practices. What has driven them to change are three different factors. The first one was a trend which started about 15 years ago by some of you in this room and your contemporaries, which was for young people to stop buying the products of companies that do harm. Companies that pollute or use child labor or whatever. And these trends became noticed by investors who began to worry about the profitability of their portfolio companies. And that led to the 30 trillion of ESG, an attempt to go to the companies that would benefit from this trend. So you had an investor trend and you had a consumer trend. And you had a very important talent trend. How many of you would like to work for a heavily polluting company? Right? Very few. If there are any, they don't dare raise their hands, right? So we understand that these three forces are actually doing something very significant to our economic system. They are aligning economic incentives with social and environmental ones. And in the review which the economics Nobel Mike Spence wrote of the second edition of my book, Impact, which has just come out, he said that it was plausible, if these trends were real, that our system is changing and will continue to change. Now, you'll ask yourself the question, what evidence is there today of impact investment successfully optimizing risk, return, and impact? Well, there are $2.5 trillion of impact investment that does that in the world. Some of it, as you would expect, would be through private capital flows, venture capital, private equity, credit, and so on. But interestingly, in very few years, half a dozen years, the social impact bond, which social finance, where you're working at the moment as an intern, invented in 2010, and I was very proud to be a co-founder of social finance and to have been involved in designing the first social impact bond. When in 2010, for the first time, we connected a reduction in the number of young people going back to jail to a financial return, with the Ministry of Justice paying for the reduction, and on the basis of its agreement to pay with social service organizations helping prisoners, raising £5 million of, mainly from foundations, of capital to fund their efforts, which resulted in a 9% reduction in reoffending, and the investors getting back their £5 million with a 3% annual return. When that happened, I didn't think that 13 years later, you would have $1 trillion of sustainability-linked bonds and loans inspired by the social impact bond. What does that mean, sustainability linked? It means if a company like Novartis, a pharmaceutical company, raises a bond whose rate of interest is dependent on achieving the sale of its products in emerging markets, that the management team of Novartis then unites in trying to pay the lowest level of interest by hitting these social targets, so aligning economic incentives with social ones. Most of that money aligns environmental incentives, but social incentives exist too. Many companies have raised this. So I would say you can see today $2.5 trillion of real impact investment, whose definition is the intention to create impact, but also the measurement of the impact created. And you can see 30 trillion, which, if it gets impact accounting, turns into impact investment for the first time. The implications of this are very far-reaching. What does transparency of impacts do? Well, it creates peer pressure for companies, right? If you look at the impact accounting data we're generating now, and you compare mining companies, for example, and their impact, and their profits after their impact, and their price-earnings ratios after the impacts have been taken into account, you see a huge gap between leaders and laggards. And to the extent that to close these impact performance gaps, companies are going to have to invest in reducing their water usage or water pollution or energy consumption. That's going to impair their profitability too. But it's also a very powerful tool for government and for consumers. How is it a powerful tool for consumers? How many of you know of the Yuka app? How many of you shop using Yuka? Any of you? A few of you? Put your hands up. About half a dozen of you. Yuka is an app which enables you to point your telephone, your cell phone, at the barcode of a product. And it tells you whether the product is good for you or harmful, and whether there are alternatives that are better for you from a health point of view, and also cheaper. 50 million people are shopping using Yuka today. About half in France, the balance mainly in the United States, as I understand it. Is it too much to expect that Yuka would not only contain the information that it has to inform consumers today, but also their impact performance as a supplier of these products? So if you look at the box of Lipton tea bags, and you see the health score is okay compared to Lipton and others, but that Associated British Foods makes $1.5 billion of environmental damage, equal to its profits. And you compare it with other companies providing tea, might consumers shift to products brought to the shelves by different consumers? So it will reinforce the consumer trend we talked about. But it's also massively important for governments. Why? Well, for one thing, governments have begun to realize that if you don't provide real tax incentives, and they can be tax credits for those doing a good job, the mechanisms of the market aren't going to lead companies to achieve the environmental targets we have set. So it begins to give a transparency to governments, which enables them to tax bad impacts. And bad water usage can't be shifted to a lower tax area in the way that profits can be. So it can actually become a reliable source of tax revenue for governments, apart from achieving the broader goal of improving emissions and the impact on society. So where do we go from here? What's the theory of change, and how is it going to affect your individual careers? Well, I'm not going to go around looking at each of you and discussing with you your ambitions and how this is going to affect them. But let me say this. These types of systemic changes take time to achieve. It's hard to predict how the political cycle will fare. Are we going to see the anti-environmental efforts of the existing American administration continue far into the future? Will Europe and Asia follow suit, or will they go with the trend rather than the political cycle? For my part, I don't meet any investors or any corporations that think that climate change is not an issue and that they don't need to make sure that they're resilient to its effects. And they need it to future-proof their profits in the future. So impact today is perhaps in the current environment best advanced by talking about impact on resilience and on future-proofing. But once investors begin to adopt impact accounting and begin to change the value of companies by shifting to companies that deliver better profit and impact performance, then you can expect business leaders to begin to double down and catch up with their peers. So I believe that this really is a watershed, that companies will have to change their behavior because of consumers and talent and investor preferences. But if you ask yourself the question, what if I'm wrong? Then how do you deal with climate? Is there a more effective way of dealing with climate than aligning environmental and economic incentives within our whole economy? Certainly the last 5 decades of political effort haven't led to the change we need. And that's why I say that impact investment is a driver of impact economies, and it's inevitable that we will get there. Because without impact economies, we cannot solve our environmental issues or reduce the huge social inequalities created by the tech revolutions, the first one in which I was privileged to play a role as a venture capitalist, and the current one, not around the microchip as before, but around AI, are creating huge opportunities for wealth for some people and pushing others into stagnating levels of remuneration or employment. So when you make a decision about your future, take the impact into account. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, define a business model that has impact at its core. The better you do in terms of profit, the more good you do. Doing good and doing well at the same time. If you're going to be working for a big corporation, ask yourself the question, is it on the right side of impact performance? Or is it going to perform very poorly in comparison with its competitors? And if you're going to be working for government, then get yourself into a position where you can advance the impact revolution, because we need it as soon as we can get it. Thank you.
Sit down.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, for me, it's a real pleasure to have you here at London Business School, because I really believe that we need people with big ideas, and you definitely are one of those. Okay, so you are, we can say, the father of impact investment, which has been an incredibly important movement and still is, although challenged. And you know, we shouldn't hide the fact that we are in a period of history in which, you know, we are going back in many ways. So, but you know, I think still it's important that these ideas survive, and I'm sure that the challenges will also make these ideas more robust and more resilient. So it's great to have you here, and you have been an inspiration for many of us. So let me start with the big question, macro question. In a way, you have seen it, you have said it already. So is impact investment the future of capitalism? Is this idea that you have to go from philanthropic to, you know, investment logic an idea that you think will survive? Is this, and will capitalism survive unless, you know, we go in that direction? I mean, I want you to spend like 2 minutes just giving us the macro picture, and then I'm going to try to challenge you on a few things.
No, I'm glad you're asking the question, because impact, the word is a new word, just like venture capital was a new word, and it took actually a very long time to become accepted, venture capital, strangely enough. People think that because you're trying to do good and do well, it must be philanthropic in the sense of giving money away, and that you will do less well economically. But I hope you can see from the comments I've made, Lucretia, I know you agree with this, that actually you have to do it for prudential reasons, apart from moral ones. Those who are unpersuaded by the moral agreement have to do it, because otherwise their businesses will suffer. In many ways, it's going to be like the arrival of technology with the PC. When the PC came out, I was in my early 30s, many people thought, this is just going to change the computer industry. They didn't see the possibility of the cellular phone and the internet. And when the internet came, nobody thought that this could revolutionize the retailing, right? And business leaders were no different than those who were people in the street looking at these developments. Some of them ignored it. They thought it wouldn't affect them. And in the end, obviously, their companies disappeared or lost ground at any rate. So I think the answer is you can do impact investing out of altruism or out of self-interest to the extent that the economic system gives you the greatest value. If you perform both on profit and impact, we will achieve our goal.
Yeah, we know from research that a lot of the drivers of impact investment, but also ESG investment, is actually not the profit motive, but preferences. I mean, there are the long-term investors who have some preferences, for example, for achieving some energy, some climate, environmental or nature or social goals. But preferences are endogenous. I mean, I'm an economist, so that, and we know that preferences, they don't come from the sky, and they are very much also influenced by policy. So that, and also the profit motive is influenced by policy. If I am an investor and want to invest in an oil company, I will take in consideration whether there is a policy in that, a public policy that limits emissions or not. So these things get very much mixed up. And so my question is, don't you think that in order for the impact investment concept to survive, you need really an ecosystem which also includes public policy, standards, a top-down and not just this bottom-up movement. And without this complementarity, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. But governments, I discovered, and it was contrary to my expectation when the social impact bond was first developed in 2010. Governments didn't grab the idea. Financial markets did. Philanthropists didn't grab the idea. They didn't start measuring outcomes and saying we should turn our philanthropic teams to pay for outcomes once they've been achieved, because it costs half as much, so you can help twice as many people. And you get a lot of data to inform your future decision-making. Neither of them did it. Financial markets did. Financial markets look much further than philanthropists and governments. However, I agree with you that without governments, it's going to be very difficult to change the whole ecosystem. And so I'm very proud of the fact that the UK government has now set up a £1 billion outcomes fund for children to pay for the improvements achieved by delivery organizations to help children in need. 500 million from central government, aiming to be matched by 500 million from local authorities which are dealing with these social issues locally. Homelessness, recidivism, youth unemployment, and so on. And that this government has also created an office for the impact economy in the Prime Minister's office. We've seen the G8 and the G7 set up task forces on impact investment. We're hopeful of bringing impact once again to the G20 agenda this time, in 2 years' time. And so our efforts have to go top-down as well. But part of the reason governments are becoming interested is because of the massive sums of money that can be raised in the financial markets. If you are a cash-strapped government with a social agenda and you can't spend money on children, if you can attract investment to do the job alongside you, then it's a way to maintain your policies at a time when otherwise you would do nothing about them. And so the opportunity that exists today is to make cash-strapped governments aware that there are trillions available now to help them achieve their social goals.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely true, but governments today face big trade-offs. Security, you mentioned it, versus impact. We are putting money into defense, and we are taking money out of climate policy. Even Canada, the Prime Minister is our friend, Mark Carney, is kind of going back a little bit on his commitment. So, there is this issue of how do you face trade-offs, and yeah.
So that may lead you to make commitments in areas where government sees benefit at the time it has to pay. Now, the big advantage today of £1 billion outcomes fund to pay for outcomes that signs contracts initially with existing organizations already helping populations of children in need. That contract enables them to raise investment capital. The outcomes payments from the fund, which the government has committed to, will come in over time. If you take an issue like youth unemployment, for example, which is a little bit beyond the children in need agenda, by the time the government pays for somebody who has been in successful employment for 6 months or a year, the government is no longer paying unemployment benefits and is receiving tax revenue on the remuneration. So it can be self-financing. And of course, you can argue that at times of greater preoccupation with defense, some governments will push everything else aside. But here in the case of the UK, it's not the case, actually. So some governments will, and some governments won't. But I'll ask you a question, Lucretia. If you look ahead 10 years, where do you see the use of impact in the economy? Like, does what I spell out convince you?
I think that this is a very important part of a system in which we have to use multiple instruments. I think policy influence preferences and also influence expectation on profitability, because policy has an impact on profitability. So I think that unless we think about those complementarities, and I'm really a believer that you get result if you combine top-down and bottom-up approach. And if you look at all these kind of experiment in the history of social policy experimentations and so on, is always this combination that eventually is a winner. Even in the experience of the IFRS, the standard setting organization of which I was a trustee, I mean, the way that the reason why we were successful in establishing the Sustainability Standards Board, it was really because we had the investors on our side, and then we also managed to have the financial stability organizations around the regulators around the world. I mean, I think you need both.
But the interesting thing with this example, Lucretia, which I've thought about a lot, it didn't come from the government top down. It came because there was a usage of information which regulators needed to ensure was at the highest level to maintain a proper market.
But I mean, I think I would correct you there, because I think that before the FRS, what we had was a bunch of NGOs doing, voluntary standards, and that created a very confusing landscape for investors.
Agreed.
So to harmonize, to get the data right, and I think you emphasize the data, which I think is an important, extremely important aspect of these projects, then you need the regulators. You cannot do it without that.
The regulators will come in when the impact accounting information is in use.
But data is not easy. But okay, so let's get some questions. Otherwise, yes, I'm talking too much. Do you have questions?
Can we give them a microphone? Yeah.
Yeah, there is one question up there.
Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for coming and share all of the insights with us. I really rely on that impact investing is here to stay. So before the MBA at LBS, I had some experience working with Grow Capital, also has some ESG lens in that as well, and also advising some of the global leading philanthropies on philanthropic fund allocation. What I have observed is that some of our clients in the philanthropy space, they are thinking of allocating some of their philanthropic funding toward impact investing. So my question is, do you feel like impact investing can be a competition against philanthropy? Because those two act as very different things.
So the interesting thing is that in theory, a foundation or charitable foundation should have a policy of investing part of its endowment, its capital, in impact investment securities, ESG, impact investment, sustainability-linked bonds and loans, and at the same time give grants that go in the same direction. Up until now, philanthropy has actually been the other way mainly. With a lot of foundations investing in fossil fuel companies to achieve the highest return, as they say it, and then giving money to charitable organizations and grants to try and fight climate change, right? You're smiling, you've seen it before. Where the two overlap a bit is that legislation in the United States, for example, enables you to make very risky investments out of your grant portfolio. And so you could argue that instead of being additive, we will find foundations putting the money not out of their endowment, which would be additive, but shifting part of their normal grant making to outcomes-based. But it would be a huge improvement in terms of performance for them to do that for their grants. Because the existing philanthropic model, by the way, in my book, there's a whole chapter on philanthropy, 2 chapters on government, interestingly, a chapter on entrepreneurs, chapter on big businesses, and so on, with examples. The problem we have is that the philanthropic model has been based on giving money away, a bit like you would give money in charity to a beggar, and then not really worrying about the effect that has been created. And so it leads to philanthropists shifting from supporting one charity for 3 years to then shifting to another charity because there's so much demand for charitable giving. What impact brings to a charitable foundation is the measurement of impact performers. And so I hope it will lead, you were referring to it, Lucretia, to a longer-term perspective where, like a business that thrives, you keep supporting it as long as it delivers. And so we might see much longer programs, philanthropic programs, extending into the future than are currently doing so.
Question there? Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. A very insightful evening. By the way, my name is Kevin. I currently work in private equity, so I can definitely relate when you say the emphasis of ESG comes and goes sometimes from line. But starting this year, I'm actually transitioning to help set up a kind of a new, smaller fund. So my question to you is, if you look back to your days at M&G International, what advice would you give yourself? And what advice would you give to your younger self if you were to start your venture? And how would you incorporate that impact lens from the start?
Today.
Thank you.
I was seated at a dinner the other day given by the British Venture Capital Association, which I'm very proud to have co-founded in 1983, long time ago. And the person from the BVCA, which is now called the UK Private Capital, told me that working for the BVCA, as it was, that 20% of the members of the venture capital and private equity community now have impact in their investments, either as dedicated impact funds, like Bridges and Apex and Bain and others, or within their flagship funds. So that's quite interesting for me, because I was talking of ESG getting to 14%. And there's a reason why, I'm answering your question, why the private equity industry is leading in terms of impact measurement now. Because the pressure at the time of fundraising that an investor, an institutional investor, can exercise on a firm's policy is much greater than the pressure they can exercise in the public market. And so the big pension funds of the US and others are saying, hey, you have to have impact in your business model. As a venture capitalist or a private equity firm, we want to know not just what financial performance you're achieving, we want to have impact objectives, we want to know whether they've been met, and of course we want it all to be measured properly. So my advice, if I were now 26 as I was when I created APAC, I would go into impact venture capital or impact private equity. Because the old game is risk return. If you take a risk return professional and you say to them, become risk return impact, it's very difficult. They're not used to looking at correlations between impact performance and sales and profits. They don't. For instance, they might not have invested in Tesla, which became a $1 trillion dollar company in 20 odd years, because it was bringing environmental into the product. They might have felt environmental, who cares? Nobody cares about environmental. Tesla fighting the automobile industry, you must be mad, right? So I think if you get yourself on the impact wavelength, if you join a firm that takes impact seriously, if it has a dedicated fund, all the better. TPG, on the west coast of the States, manages $30 billion in impact private equity there. 30 billion, they're not talking small money. So, read the book.
So some good tips. There was a question there, yeah?
Thank you. I'm on the board of trustees of a charity that supports women who've had children removed from their care, and there's various projects to try and broaden our scope so that we support women who are also, well, young women or teenagers essentially who are at risk of having children removed from their care. Children removed from their care in future, and we've relied on local authority funding and grants from philanthropic funds. And my understanding from what you were saying about the work with offenders before was that the local authority would give returns to the VC funds. So it was a sort of, the government would provide a 3% return on the basis of the impact. So how do you engage local authorities? Because it's not... I have to say, it's quite hard persuading local authorities for funding for certain things. And so that's an extra step. You're basically saying, you're trying to involve the VCs and the local authorities together. It sounds like quite a big ask.
So interestingly, in the UK, local authorities have been driving the growth of outcomes partnerships, not central government, interestingly. And You have some local authorities. Greater Manchester is, one example, that have been real believers in this. The advantage for them of entering into an outcomes partnership, which comprises a source of finance, which could be a social impact bond or another outcomes-based, outcomes-dependent financial instrument, a delivery organization, charity usually, but could be a profit with purpose business, and an outcomes payer, which is a local authority. But if government is making available £500 million to supplement your local authority budget in an outcomes payment structure, they're very interested in doing that. When you speak to local authorities, they say, at least some of them say, the most important thing about the mechanism may not be the fact that it brings the money. It's the fact that it brings the data about what works and what doesn't work. And that influences our policy. It also makes sure that if something doesn't work, it stops. Very often, the government programs go on for years beyond the proof that they don't work, because you have political reasons why nobody wants to stop them. So I actually think local authorities will see now with these with this new £1 billion fund, we'll see whether local authorities step up in the way I expect. I believe they will.
Ronnie, I also work for a charity. A few of us with our MBAs work in the charity sector. My question just dismissed you. Do you think the whole accounting system needs to change? So I think from what you were saying at the beginning, you're envisaging a whole set of data, which will be useful, but I'm interpreting from that set of data about impact sits along the accounting data. And I wonder whether we need to be more radical and just redo the accounting data. So what you said before, the risk-return traditional private equity guys are finding it difficult to relearn impact investing. So, is there a danger if we educate another generation of accountants that they're still looking at everything in traditional profit loss terms? Do we need to kind of rip up the GAAP, the general accepted accounting principles, and sort of create some new ones that monetizes effectively or gives financial value for impact?
No,
let's collect, because we have two more questions. So yes, that you have been, yeah. And then we'll collect it.
Hi, Sir Ronnie. Just a bit of a selfish question from my point of view. I currently work in public markets, and I'm looking to transition into private markets. And obviously, with your long career, you would have a great view on what attributes would make someone who's able to create long-term value and also be credible in long-term investing. So from your perspective, what would that be?
One more question and then we close. So.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I suppose connected a little bit to the accounting question. I wondered how you see impact, because I see it, there's two potential ways to see it. Either it's part of the two-dimensional risk and reward and it's part of risk, or it's three-dimensional, as it were, and effectively every investment case has a different impact profile.
Yeah, no, well, I'll come to that.
Okay, so get the accounting question.
I'll get the accounting first,
question.
and then we'll talk about the personal one, and then about the three-dimensional question. I agree with you on accounting, and our immediate objective is to have an impact statement that is a P&L that shows revenues, costs, and impact broken down and profit, impact-weighted profits at the bottom. I think within 5 years we will see, in my view, a significant number of companies publishing that. Eventually it will become mandated. Depending on how quickly the impact accounting information gets used, you can expect the regulators to step in and mandate it earlier. So I agree with you. Now, will it be the same people in an accounting firm who are measuring the impact and the profit? I was speaking to somebody in the accounting profession, very senior figure, about the impact of artificial intelligence on auditing. He said to me, I give auditing 5 years. In 5 years' time, we will be able to get instantaneous audit of a company's books. You could do it monthly, you could do it weekly, you could do it daily if you want to do it daily. It'd be very interesting in the case of impact to see how the publication of emission information and so on goes. If it's on a yearly basis, then it'll be a once a year occasion. If it's more frequent than that, then it will resemble financial accounting. So it may be that at the end of the day, it's the same person using AI models to audit impact numbers and financial numbers.
You have to get the data on the supply chain, which is not obvious.
Which is not easy, yeah.
So,
but again, with artificial intelligence, your ability to impute supply chain numbers now is very high, very much higher. And if companies have the wrong number imputed, then they have an incentive to go and get the right number. Now, with regard to what it takes to make a good investor and the difference between a public stocks investor and a private equity investor, my first book was called The Second Bounce of the Ball. And it was about entrepreneurship and venture capital and building up Apex. I wrote it 18 years ago. I said in there that really your ability as an investor depends in good measure on whether the microcosm of the world in your head corresponds to reality. Like, there are some people who, when they see the microchip arrive, realize it's going to change not just the computer industry, but that's the second bounce of the ball, the one that you don't see as obviously. And then there are some other people who don't. So the further ahead you can see, the better you will be at private markets. When you get into public markets, when I left Apex, I went on the boards, as you heard, of the Harvard Management Company, the Oxford Investment Committee, and others. It's a very different game. It's much more short-term. You need the long-term view, and so on. So I hope that helps you to think about it. Now, with regard to whether impact is an element of risk, no, it's not. It's not an element of risk. And actually, how much time do we have?
I think we can continue the conversation when we go to refreshments. So we have to close because,
okay. So we have to close. I think there's a historical parallel with the measurement of risk. The measurement of risk only came in the 50s. It brought new thinking, risk-adjusted returns, diversification. It enabled portfolios to expand from just government stocks and bonds to include private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, globalization, investment in emerging markets. The measurement of impact will be like the measurement of risk. In my view, it's a profit opportunity as well as a risk mitigator. And companies that don't take it into account will make the wrong decisions about their product lines, their employment practices, and the investment that they have to make to reduce their emissions. So very much three-dimensional.
I think we should close, and thank you very much. But there is going to be refreshment and a book and everything, so you can continue the conversation there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you should come back.
With pleasure.